I genuinely thought that the mine had been tapped at this point. I was sure. I was sure at this point that was it. Maybe we were going to get that. Maybe we were going to strike a diamond with the Andy Street. This is why I lost blog post. I'm still expecting that, by the way, but still hasn't dropped yet. But I'm still mining for that nugget. Still, it's there somewhere. There's still gold in them there salt mines somewhere. It's coming eventually, but maybe it's not. Who knows? We'll see. After all, we did go through that Andy Street fan fiction. Remember that as well. But this ultimately, I think, probably going to be the last heap of salt from the local elections, unless something else comes, unless we hit a brand new, fresh vein of salt. This is probably going to be the last lot of it. So, what is it, might you ask? Well, if you've seen the video title, you already know. But this is it. This is the last lot of salt. And what is this? This is the Conservatives complaining about reform. Yes, this is going to be trotting out the new tagline that some Conservatives are desperate to sort of get out there, that if you vote reform, you get Labour. That you might as well be voting for the Labour Party instead. And they're not wrong. We have seen in the polls that reform have pulled away or peeled off enough votes away from the Conservatives, in some cases, to allow Labour to win. That is going to be incredibly good, especially in a lot of the swing seats. That is going to be incredibly impactful to get a lot of Labour wins, not just there as well, but in many other seats as well. So we are seeing roughly between, I think it's 12 to 15%, I think it is roughly, but it might shake out differently at the general election because, you're going to get more voters out there. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but they are still incredibly salty. And oh boy, you know where we're going. Yep, we're heading over to Conservative Home because, oh boy, the salt is indeed strong from this. And this comes from a Scottish Conservative, Ross Thompson. So, faithful Conservative Party members have been now left reeling by the recent local elections in England. The loss our party suffered were catastrophic. At least he's being honest. At least he is being honest about those results. We lost around half our seats, which was devastating, including the control of 10 councils. Most brutally, we lost Andy Street as mayor of the West Midlands. And honestly, as I said at the time, still, the entire strategy of the Conservatives was, we are going to lose councils, we are going to lose seats. We can be fine with that. We can deal with that. Their two big pillars were keeping Andy Street and Ben Houchin. They managed to keep Houchin, although he did lose a lot of votes this time. He didn't win as much as he did last time, which certainly spells trouble for him in the future. But Andy Street losing in the way he did destroyed any illusion that this was a good strategy, that they could go, oh, well, we kept, our West Midlands mayor and the Teesside Valley mayor, so it really wasn't as bad as night as we thought. But he lays it out there very clearly. Over half the seats they were defending lost. They lost over 10 councils, and they lost Andy Street. That still an incredibly bad night for our local election results. So, the results show that around a third of Tory voters are now disillusioned with the current Conservatives, and they voted for reform, with the most significant switch coming from those who had voted for Boris Johnson's Tories in 2019. So, in most cases, these weren't Labour voters, or at least, or shall we say, Conservative voters. They weren't traditional Conservative voters. Some of them were former Labour voters in 2019, still trying to sort of stick with that sort of proto message that reform had been putting out. But even then, they can't seem to sell it as well as Boris Johnson. So He continues, it is difficult to tell the full disruptive impact that reform will have at the general election, given that they've only stood a handful of candidates in one of the 6 council wards. However, the Conservatives' vote fell the greatest in the seats where Reform UK stood a candidate. In those wards, our support fell around 19 points, compared to the 11 points in the wards where Reform did not stand. Yet, despite the significant number of voters that Reform took from the Tories, they only managed to elect 2 councillors. And that's the whole plan of this. Even if they do that, it's taking votes away from them. And their understanding is that their takeaway from this is that they've got to lean even harder into the right, into that Reform UK pattern, and somehow that will save them. Because they have been sort of terrified by Farage for years, and they are still terrified by this. And I've said this before, even when we're talking about other sort of third parties, could another sort of left-wing party do this to the Labour Party to sort of drag it right? I don't think no, because Reform UK, the Brexit Party, UKIP, was very, very much a phenomenon. Who's the Farage that is going to be the terror that flaps in the night? Who are they going to get all that money from to fill their coffers? The multi-million pounds donations that Reform UK, so that they could do all this campaigning, stand all these candidates, that doesn't exist on the left. So as try as they might, it's not going to be anywhere near the level of success that that UKIP, Reform, etc., and Nigel Farage had. We're even seeing this now in the polls. Roughly, what I think they've still, 8%. I think last poll, I think it was. That's still not incredibly successful, considering they were at 5% and still hovering around that 5% for a very long time before they went up 2 points. So, Green Party. And of course, that doesn't include the mess of a manifesto, all the stuff that they, again, but that's another topic for another time. But anyway, back to this. So the biggest beneficiaries of reform for candidates, of course, were not Reform actually themselves, but Labour. It is therefore now blindingly obvious that standing candidates Reform has not helped the Conservative case, but only helped elect those for the centre-right. It has now instead split the right and ushered in Labour victories. Reform support has now swelled from the disillusioned Conservative voters who voted for Reform and Conservatives who believe that the government is now too big and that taxes are too high, spending is out of control, and that immigration needs to be brought under control. That's exactly what the Conservatives are doing. They're planning more tax cuts. Why aren't they winning them over? There's bigger questions about this. And there's a lot of fundamental questions that the Conservatives really need to ask themselves, like, why are they actually losing people to Reform? Is it actually worth pursuing these things to try and get back what would be a very, very small amount of votes, while abandoning a far, far larger set of people? Remember, we saw this in the polls, where you have that 35% version of centrists, which they are abandoning because they are going after that really hardcore right vote. So they are abandoning more and more of the moderates. They're not voting. They're switching to pursue a really small selection of votes. Really, really small. So as valid as many of those grievances of disillusioned Tory voters are with the government, I like it, valid. But there you go. I did say it was a bit salty. And of course, as tempting as reform might be, the local election results do prove beyond a doubt that voting for them at an election later this year will be the worst mistake imaginable. Voting reform would only serve as a spoiler and hand the keys of Downing Street to Keir Starmer. You know what else it would do? It would send what the remainder of the Tory party into an absolute hissy fit, and it would end up destroying them more because they only would pursue an even more hard right agenda because of reform, trying to chase an ever more shrinking like right wing vote. But there you go. Oh, we're after this tiny, slither of 25% when actually in the center there's a lot more votes to be won. you know, the lesson really was Andy Street was right. you don't hear a lot of people espousing that except those new streetists, I suppose we'll call them, espousing that view, and they are very, very much in a minority. But even they cannot say what policies exactly should have been pursued or what new policies the party should pursue to sort of go and gain those votes. So back to this. So reform obviously cannot win an election. Richard Trice will never become prime minister. Rather than splitting the Conservative vote by supporting reform, this will only now ensure a Labour majority. Disturbingly, of course, during a Radio Times interview talking about the West Midlands mayoral results, Trice celebrated and explained how pleased he was of Street's defeat. No matter how disaffected you feel with the Conservatives, on what planet is it better for right wingers to not just put socialists in power, but to celebrate it? I love it. Love it. Because many people on the left would say, how they're not socialists, but how is it whenever we cover these people on the right, they view Labour as like the biggest single socialist threat to the country? you know? Anyway, so if, like me, you are, of course, a conservative who believes in individual freedom, the rule of law, free market, limited government, fiscal responsibility, and protecting our children from from discredited gender ideology, and ensuring strong national defences as the government's first obligation, then answer me this: how can you ever achieve any of these goals by putting Labour in power? Again, trying to go after those disaffected conservative people, probably not the best question to answer because they're probably, like I say, going to vote for this. Your argument is a bit lackluster. It's only going to really result in a very, very few minor points. Meanwhile, you abandon the more moderates, you abandon the centre ground, and guess what? They're the ones that are going headed towards Labour because that is a far bigger voting block that is out there in the UK. We've covered that in a video just showing you, and it's shown every single time, poll after poll after poll. There are far more centrists out there than there are people on the left and on the right. And that's where the votes are to be gotten. So if you want to try and congratulate yourself on your ideological purity while the country goes to hell in a handcart, then on you go. Wow. That could almost be said by someone very much on the left arguing on that, but there you go. How dare you vote Labour instead of Green Party? But there you go. But I hope you think it's worth it when Labour hikes your taxes, interfere with how you raise your kids, allows immigration to be uncontrolled, and punishes their dangerous ideology on you. You can then survey from your high horse, but the damage to Britain is done, and say, "Don't blame me. I voted for Ooh, salty to the extreme there. But honestly, I'd that almost if you were to change just a few of those lines and words, that is exactly what you would hear from a lot of disaffected people on the left. Like, I'm never going to vote Labour for those exact same reasons. There's very few, um, changes you could just make to that, and it sounds very similar to what a lot of those people are now saying about Labour. But there you go. The same now applies to the Tory voters who say, "I cannot vote Tories, I'm staying at home," and in the process are now abdicating their civic duty, handing their seat over to Labour. Who can you be now rest assured will now stand against all the conservative values that you hold? By sitting out the election, instead of getting a Tory Prime Minister, you will get a socialist. Keir Starmer is left-wing, but he's not a socialist, which is part of the problem for many people on the left. And, of course, people on the right, well, he's still a bit too left-wing for them. But there you go. So if you are a conservative, where on earth is the sense in allowing this to happen? The outcome is that you cede power to our opponents. Ultimately, there are several lessons from the local elections for conservatives. Let's see what we get here. Firstly, the party must go into the election united. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Does being united mean that I expect every Conservative MP to agree on everything? Of course not. Do you agree with your partner 100% of the time? You can always agree on you can't always agree on anything. Politics, like relationships, is the same. Well, again, good luck with that. Because so far, singing Kumbaya has not worked. So when I served in the Commons, I found that many of my colleagues would apply a litmus test before deciding to work with other Conservative MPs. Are they pro-Brexit enough? And were they driven by finding these areas of disagreements? MPs would better serve us by trying to find common ground and agreeing on a core set of Conservative values and principles. United around those values, the party must now go forward together and be determined to put those values into action. Well, congratulations, you just pointed out one of the biggest problems and why the Conservative Party is so split. Because the Conservatives are just so ideologically split at the moment, so fractured that they cannot even agree on those things. Shockingly, every so often, Conservative Home does point out just how bad their party is. Anyway, secondly, of course, the Conservatives must then offer an inspiring Conservative vision for the future. There should be a vision rooted in Conservative values that transcends the immediate challenges and offers a compelling picture of a nation brimming with hope, opportunity, and aspiration. Once again, the Conservatives can't even agree on what that vision should be. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan both set an example of vision of leadership. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher infamously had a bag carrier, a hatchet man that would go around and sort out all these disaffected MPs and bring them into line. Has Rishi Sunak done that? Is there anyone in the Conservative Party capable of doing that? No. Because as much as I do not like Margaret Thatcher, at least she was good at leadership. She had a tangle on the leadership until, of course, she lost control and she herself went over the edge of a cliff. But for a good while, she had almost complete control of the Conservative Party and knew how to run the apparatus. There is no one in the Conservative Party at the moment can do that. So, in the 1976 Conservative Republican Convention, Reagan said the party should have a platform that is, quote, is the banner to bold, unmistakable colors with no pastel shades. Both Reagan and Thatcher achieved extraordinary electoral success because they offered a bold vision, optimism, and decisiveness. They made their visions into reality. Or, if you're Margaret Thatcher, you win a war. But there you go. Going into the next general election, the Conservatives must also wave the banner of the mistakenly bold colours and Conservative principles. Again, Conservatives can't even agree what those principles should be. We must give voters a real choice to make. How often have we heard people say there's nothing different between the parties? They're all as bad as each other. When the voters are offered real choice, boldness wins every time. Except you can't even agree on what that should be, as I keep on saying. He keeps on praying, we need to do this, we need to do this. This will get us elected. But you can't even agree or even want to talk about how you would get to that, because that involves what I've talked about before, someone coming in and just starting cracking heads together to start bringing them into line. But they can't even do that because that will cause a huge amount of chaos in the Conservative Party if that were to happen. So there is, of course, still time. No, there isn't. The Tories are trying to articulate an ambitious vision for Britain that would at least motivate the supporters, pull back from the temptation of reform, and reignite enthusiasm amongst voters. Too little, far too late. There is no one enough or putting any forward bold ideas Even he hasn't put any forward bold ideas to do that, except the usual, statements we've seen of low taxes, low government. Well, okay, there are consequences if you do some of that stuff. How are you going to solve those consequences? Don't worry, it'll be fine. Growth. As if that solves all the problems, but there you go. Um, so there is still good news that we need to go back to the drawing board. The blueprint is already there. Thatcher showed us how to win and win well. Good luck on that. She demonstrated that there are conservative solutions to the challenges that we face, and the conservative values can actually change the world around us for the better. Conservative politics can be inspirational, aspirational, transformational. Conservative principles themselves are timeless. They aren't locked in the 1980s. Well, they absolutely are, but there you go. Although we face different challenges today, we can still apply the same principles that we saw enormous conservative success. No, you can't, because we face different challenges completely to what we faced in the 80s, but there you go. As we were then, conservative principles are now en route to restoring British greatness and prosperity. Well, you've had 14 years to try and prove that. You haven't really done that, but there you go. Things are undeniably difficult for the Conservatives, but as Thatcher said, you have to fight a battle more than once to win it. Well, you are fighting battles, but not even against the opposition. You can't even fight the battles against yourselves because you keep on losing countless times over and over and over again. And yet, in the comments down below, it's well worth pointing out all these people disaffected Conservatives saying, yeah, we're still not going to vote for you. Still not going to vote for you. Yeah, it is really not looking good for them. Really not looking good for them on so many fronts. And like I say, if they do decide to chase that reform vote, remember the video we did about, which side has the most voters? Turns out it's the centrists. They outnumber us on both sides. If you want to win, you have to court more centrists than anyone else. Like it or not, that's just how our political system is. Even if we changed to a PR system, centrist parties would be the dominant party. Like it or not, that's how they would be. That's how the voting system would go. That's how it would play out. The data is there. If 35% of the British public consider themselves centrist compared to the 24% on the left, 25% on the right, which dominant party is going to make up the PR parties? As much as I would want to go to PR, that's another reality that, again, we would have to face, just as we have to face that reality now of what the British public want to vote. But as I always say, there's a lot of hope in this, because guess what? People really want a lot of these progressive stuff. It polls really well. So just because the centrists are in large numbers does not mean that they do not want progressive things. So, hey, there you go. So anyway, yeah, more wonderful salt. Probably the last I would expect, as I said at the beginning of this, the last lot of salt from the local elections. I don't expect we'll get anything more, but who knows? Maybe we will. Maybe we'll strike a fresh rain soon. I don't think we'll get anything really until after the general elections. And oh boy, will they flow? The salt will flow throughout the land. But we'll bring that to you, of course, when that happens. But of course, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to click the like and share button on your way out. Do leave a comment down below as well. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.